The morning sun cast long shadows through the crystal dome of Nexus Station, its artificial light struggling to warm the cold metal corridors that snaked through the massive orbital facility. In the deepest levels of the station, where even the maintenance crews rarely ventured, a sound echoed that would make most sentient beings turn away in disgust. It was the sound of breaking bones, followed by a weak cry that barely registered as pain anymore. Zara's wings had grown back overnight as they always did. The delicate membrane stretched between bone-like fingers gleamed with an opalescent sheen that caught what little light filtered down to the detention levels. They were beautiful wings, meant for soaring through the methane clouds of her homeworld, meant for dancing in the spiral winds that carried her people's songs across continents. Now they served only as fresh canvas for her tormentors' daily ritual of cruelty. The hegemony guards entered her cell with practiced efficiency. Their exoskeletons gleamed dull silver, insectoid faces hidden behind polarized visors that reflected Zara's broken form back at her. She had stopped trying to hide in the corner months ago. There was nowhere to run in the cramped space, and running only made them angrier. Morning exercise time, wing rat. The lead guard's voice buzzed through his vocoder, mechanical and emotionless. His species, the Cathara, had long ago replaced their vocal cords with artificial implants that stripped away any trace of natural emotion from their speech. It made their cruelty feel clinical, systematic, which somehow made it worse. Zara pressed herself against the far wall, her wings instinctively folding around her thin frame. The hegemony had been feeding her just enough to keep her alive, but not enough to maintain her strength. Her once proud feathers had dulled to a sickly gray, and the muscles that should have powered her flight had withered away during her months in captivity. "Please," she whispered, though she knew it was pointless. "I've told you everything I know about the resistance. There's nothing left to—" The energy baton crackled to life, its blue glow filling the small cell. The lead guard didn't even let her finish speaking before bringing it down across the primary joint of her left wing. The bone snapped with a wet crack that echoed off the metal walls, and Zara's scream tore from her throat like a physical thing, but they weren't done. They were never done with just one break. The second guard moved to her right wing, methodically positioned his baton and struck. Another snap. Another scream that grew weaker as Zara's voice began to fail. The third guard waited for her to stop writhing before breaking, the delicate finger bones that gave her wings their shape and flexibility. One by one, with careful precision, until both wings hung useless and twisted at her sides. "Tomorrow they'll be healed," the lead guard observed, making notes on a datapad. "Her species' regenerative capabilities are quite remarkable. We could continue this indefinitely. Should we increase the session length?" asked the second guard, powering down his baton. "Command wants to know if she's holding back any information about the Aviarn fleet movements." "No need," the leader replied. "This one broke weeks ago. She's telling the truth when she says she doesn't know anything useful. But the daily sessions serve another purpose. Terra is an excellent motivator for her species. When we release footage of these sessions to the outer colonies, other Aviarns will be much more cooperative." Zara lay crumpled on the floor, her broken wings spread beneath her like fallen prayer flags. She had heard this conversation before, or variations of it. She was no longer a prisoner of war in their eyes. She was a propaganda tool, a symbol of what happened to those who opposed the hegemony's expansion. Her pain was broadcast across the galaxy as a warning to others who might think to resist. The guards left without another word, the cell door sealing behind them with a pneumatic hiss. Zara remained motionless for long minutes, feeling the familiar fire of her bones beginning to knit themselves back together. The healing process was almost as painful as the breaking, a slow burn that would build through the day until, by evening, her wings would be whole again, just in time for tomorrow morning's session, 3 levels above. In the civilian quarters of Nexus Station, a young woman named Sarah Chun finished her breakfast and checked her work assignment for the day. The datapad showed her route through the lower maintenance tunnels, a routine inspection that should take most of the morning. She was new to the station, just another human technician in the vast workforce that kept the hegemony's infrastructure running. Sarah had volunteered for this assignment, specifically because it was boring. Humans were still relatively new to galactic society, having only achieved faster-than-light travel a few decades ago. Most alien species saw them as useful but unremarkable workers, good for manual labor and maintenance tasks that required nimble fingers and problem-solving skills. Sarah encouraged this perception, found it useful to be underestimated. What the hegemony didn't know about Sarah Chun was that she had spent 3 years as a combat medic in the Seoul Defense Corps before mustering out and taking civilian work. They didn't know that her innocent-looking toolkit contained several items that weren't standard maintenance equipment. And they definitely didn't know that she was here on Nexus Station for reasons that had nothing to do with fixing ventilation systems. Sarah made her way through the upper levels of the station. Acknowledging the various alien species, she passed with polite nods. Nexus Station was a melting pot of galactic civilization, home to dozens of different races who worked together under hegemony oversight. Most of them seemed content enough with the arrangement, though Sarah had noticed that certain species were conspicuously absent from positions of authority. The lift descended through multiple levels, past the commercial zones and residential areas, past the industrial sections and cargo bays, all the way down to the maintenance sublevels, where the air recyclers hummed and water processors gurgled behind thick walls. Sarah's assignment today was to inspect the atmospheric systems on level sub-7, but her real interest lay 2 levels deeper. She had been monitoring hegemony communications for weeks, using skills learned during her military service to slice through their encryption protocols. Humans might be seen as simple-minded by galactic standards, but their talent for electronic warfare was becoming legendary in certain circles. What she had discovered in those communications had made her blood run cold. The hegemony was torturing prisoners in the deep levels of Nexus Station, broadcasting the sessions as psychological warfare against rebellious populations. And according to the communications she had intercepted, today's session would involve an aviarian prisoner whose screams were becoming quite popular entertainment in certain hegemony circles. Sarah completed her assigned rounds efficiently, documenting every valve and sensor reading with meticulous care. Her cover had to be perfect, but as she worked, part of her mind was calculating distances, timing guard rotations, and planning routes through the station's Warren-like lower levels. At 1300 hours, she submitted her completed inspection report and logged out of the central maintenance system. According to her official schedule, she was now off duty until tomorrow morning. What she did with her personal time was her own business. Sarah returned to her small quarters and opened an innocuous-looking equipment case. Inside, hidden beneath a false bottom, were the tools she would need for tonight's work: a military-grade plasma cutter disguised as a standard welding torch, micro-explosives that looked like standard electrical components, a combat knife that appeared to be nothing more than a utility tool, and most importantly, a small medical kit designed for treating severe injuries in battlefield conditions. She had studied the detention level layouts until she could navigate them in her sleep. She knew which corridors had the heaviest guard presence and which were watched only by automated sensors she could disable. She knew where the cameras had blind spots and how long it took security teams to respond to alerts in different sections of the station, but what she didn't know, and wouldn't until she saw it with her own eyes, was just how broken the prisoner in Cell 7 Delta had become. Sarah had seen torture victims before. During her time in the Seoul Defense Corps, she thought she was prepared for whatever she might find. She was wrong. As evening approached and the station's artificial day cycle dimmed to simulate night, Sarah made her final preparations. She strapped her gear into a maintenance harness that would let her move freely through the ventilation ducts, then spent 20 minutes in meditation, centering herself for what was to come. In her experience, combat was 10% planning and 90% controlled fury. Tonight she would need both in equal measure, because if the intercepted communications were accurate, tomorrow morning would bring another session of systematic torture designed to break an innocent being's spirit for the entertainment of monsters. Sarah Chun had joined the sole defense corps to protect humanity from alien threats. She had never imagined that one day she would be protecting aliens from the worst parts of humanity's new galactic neighbors, but she had taken an oath once, in a ceremony under Earth's yellow sun, to protect those who could not protect themselves. That oath hadn't expired when she left military service, tomorrow morning, when the hegemony guards came for their daily entertai. The ventilation shaft was barely wide enough for Sarah's shoulders, and the metal walls conducted sound with disturbing efficiency. Every scrape of her clothing against the ductwork seemed amplified in the darkness, though she knew the automated sensors would dismiss such noises as normal thermal expansion. She had been crawling through the station's mechanical spaces for nearly an hour, following a route that would bring her to the detention levels without triggering any security protocols. 20 meters ahead, a dim glow marked one of the maintenance access points she had memorized from the station schematics. Sarah paused to check her gear once more, ensuring that everything was secured and wouldn't rattle when she moved. The modified welding torch hung heavy on her belt, its weight a constant reminder of what she might need to do. Before this night was over, the access panel opened silently on well-oiled hinges, and Sarah dropped down into a narrow service corridor lined with pipes and electrical conduits. The air here was stale and recycled, thick with the metallic tang of old machinery. According to her calculations, she was now 2 levels above the detention cells, with only the guard stations and automated defenses between her and the prisoner she had come to rescue. Sarah activated a small scanner and began mapping the security network around her. Humans might be underestimated in galactic society, but their talent for electronic warfare was becoming the stuff of legend among those who knew where to look. The scanner identified 3 camera nodes within 50 meters, all of them following predictable patrol patterns that hadn't been updated in months. She moved through the gaps, in coverage with practiced ease, using maintenance panels and equipment housings for concealment. The hegemony's overconfidence was working in her favor. They had never considered that one of their own maintenance workers might pose a threat to their operations. The first guard checkpoint came into view around a bend in the corridor. 2 Cathara guards stood at attention beside a sealed blast door, their insectoid heads turning in slow arcs as they scanned the empty hallway. Sarah studied their movements from her hiding place behind a power distribution panel, timing their patrol pattern down to the second. She had fought Cathara soldiers before, during the border conflicts that preceded humanity's formal entry into galactic society. They were tough, disciplined, and utterly ruthless, but they had one critical weakness that most species didn't recognize. Their enhanced exoskeletons made them stronger and more durable than baseline humanoids. But the same technology that gave them those advantages also made them dependent on their suit's life. Support systems. Sarah waited for both guards to turn away from her position, then slipped from cover and moved along the wall toward them. The micro-explosive in her hand was no larger than a coin, designed to look like a routine maintenance component if anyone examined it closely. She attached it to the power coupling that fed the guard's equipment, then retreated to her hiding place. The explosion, when it came, was barely louder than a light switch being flipped, but the electromagnetic pulse it generated was enough to shut down both guards' exoskeletons simultaneously. They collapsed to the deck, their artificial breathing systems falling, silent as their backup power failed to engage. Sarah was already moving before their bodies hit the floor. The blast door's electronic lock was tied to the same power grid she had just disabled, and it took her less than 30 seconds to manually override the mechanism and slip through into the detention level proper. The smell hit her immediately. Fear, pain, and desperation mixed with the sharp tang of disinfectant and medical waste. This wasn't just a prison. It was a laboratory, a place where suffering was measured and documented with scientific precision. Sarah's jaw tightened as she recognized the hallmarks of systematic torture disguised as research. Cell 7 Delta was halfway down the main corridor, past a dozen other detention cells that Sarah forced herself not to examine too closely. She could hear soft sounds coming from some of them, whispers and sobs that spoke of other prisoners enduring their own private hells. But her mission tonight was focused on one specific victim. The aviaran whose torture sessions were being broadcast as entertainment. The cell door was reinforced durasteel with a small observation window set at eye level. Sarah approached it carefully, keeping to the shadows as much as possible. What she saw through that window made her stop breathing for a moment. The creature huddled in the far corner was barely recognizable as the proud, winged being she had seen in the intercepted video files. Zara's wings were a twisted mass of healing bone and torn membrane, clearly broken and regrown so many times that they no longer folded properly against her body. Her feathers had lost their color, faded to a dull gray that spoke of malnutrition and despair. But it was her eyes that hit Sarah the hardest. They were empty. Not just sad or frightened, but completely hollow, as if the person behind them had simply given up and retreated so far inside herself that nothing could reach her. Any more? Sarah had seen that look before. In the faces of prisoners rescued from enemy camps during the Soul Wars, it was the expression of someone who had been broken so thoroughly that they could no longer imagine a world where the pain might stop, the cells locking. Mechanism was more sophisticated than the blast door, but Sarah had come prepared for that contingency. The modified welding torch made short work of the lock assembly, cutting through the reinforced metal with surgical precision. She made sure to keep the cuts small and clean, creating an opening that could be resealed if necessary. The cell door swung open on silent hinges, and Sarah stepped inside. Zara didn't react to her presence at first, didn't even look up from the floor where she sat cradled against the wall. It was only when Sarah spoke her name softly that the aviaran's head lifted slightly. "Zara," Sarah said again, keeping her voice gentle but clear. "My name is Sarah Chun. I'm here to help you." The empty eyes fixed on Sarah's face for a moment, then drifted away again as if the effort of focusing was too much. When Zara spoke, her voice was barely a whisper, hoarse from screaming. "You're human," she said, the words carrying no particular emotion. "I didn't know humans worked in the detention levels." "I don't work here," Sarah replied, settling into a crouch a few feet away from the broken aviaran. "I'm a maintenance technician. I heard about what they're doing to you, and I came to get you out." A bitter laugh escaped Zara's throat, though there was no humor in it. "Get me out? Do you know what they do to prisoners who try to escape? They don't just break wings. They break everything, piece by piece, until there's nothing left but screaming." Sarah studied the scarring on Zara's arms and legs, evidence of previous injuries that had healed imperfectly. The hegemony guards had clearly experimented with different forms of torture, testing the limits of aviaran regeneration abilities. She felt a cold fury building in her chest, the same controlled rage that had carried her through the worst battles of the Soul Wars. "I'm not talking about a prison break," Sarah said carefully. "I'm talking about burning this place down around their ears and making sure they can never hurt you or anyone else again." For the first time since Sarah had entered the cell, Zara's eyes showed a spark of something other than emptiness. It wasn't hope exactly, but it wasn't complete despair either. "You don't understand what you're saying," Zara whispered. "This isn't just one station. This is the hegemony. They have fleets, armies, entire star systems under their control. One human can't fight something that big." Sarah smiled then, and there was something in that expression that made Zara shiver. It was the kind of smile that belonged on a battlefield, cold and sharp and utterly without mercy. "You'd be surprised what one human can do when she's properly motivated," Sarah said. "But you're right about one thing. I can't fight the entire hegemony. Not alone, anyway." She opened her medical kit and began laying out supplies, keeping her movements slow and non-threatening. Zara watched warily as Sarah prepared bandages and healing gel, clearly uncertain whether this was real or just another form of psychological torture. "I need to treat your injuries," Sarah explained. "The regeneration process isn't working properly because of the repeated trauma. Your wings are trying to heal, but they're setting wrong each time because the breaks are too severe." Zara pulled her ruined wings closer to her body, a protective gesture that spoke of months of conditioning. "They'll just break them again tomorrow. They always do." "No," Sarah said firmly. "They won't." Because tomorrow morning is going to be very different from today. As Sarah began cleaning and treating Zara's wounds, she explained her plan. It wasn't the simple rescue mission that Zara had initially assumed. Sarah had something much more ambitious in mind. A strategy that would turn the hegemony's own methods against them and send a message that would echo across the galaxy. The torture sessions are broadcast live to intimidate other potential rebels, Sarah explained as she worked. But they're also recorded and stored in the station's central database. Everything they've done to you, every moment of pain they've inflicted, it's all documented. Zara winced as Sarah applied healing gel to a particularly deep scar. What does that matter? The hegemony controls the communications networks. No one who could help would ever see those recordings. That's where you're wrong. The central power distribution center hummed with barely contained energy. Massive conduits carrying electricity throughout Nexus Station like the arteries of some vast technological organism. Sarah moved between the towering generator units with practiced efficiency, her scanner mapping the connections that would give her access to the station's most critical systems. Zara followed close behind, moving carefully on legs that were still weak from months of imprisonment. This is the nerve center, Sarah explained as she connected her portable computer to a primary data junction. Everything on the station runs through here. Communications, security, life support, even the detention level monitoring systems. The computer screen filled with scrolling code as Sarah's intrusion programs began their work. Years of military training had taught her that information was often more powerful than any weapon. And tonight she intended to prove that lesson on a galactic scale. I'm copying everything, she told Zara as data flowed across the screen. Every recording, every document, every piece of evidence about what they've been doing down there. But more importantly, I'm preparing a little surprise for tomorrow morning's entertainment session. Zara watched the human work with growing amazement. Sarah's fingers moved across the keyboard with inhuman speed, slicing through encryption protocols that should have taken teams of specialists weeks to crack. The casual competence with which she dismantled the hegemony's security system spoke of skills far beyond those of a simple maintenance technician. You're military, Zara said suddenly. It wasn't a question. Sarah glanced up from her work, noting the sharpened awareness in the aviane's eyes. Former military. Soul Defense Course, 3rd Information Warfare Division. I mustered out 2 years ago and took civilian work, but some skills you never really lose. Then this isn't just a rescue mission, Zara realized. You're conducting a military operation against the hegemony. In a way, Sarah admitted, turning her attention back to the computer. Though it's more personal than official. The Soul Defense Corps doesn't know I'm here, and Earth's government would probably disavow any knowledge of my actions if this goes bad. But sometimes personal is enough. The computer chimed softly, indicating that the data transfer was complete. Sarah disconnected her portable system and began connecting to a different set of terminals, these ones tied directly to the station's communications array. Her next task would be far more visible than simple data theft. What are you doing now? Zara asked, settling herself carefully against a support pillar. Her wings, properly treated for the first time in months, were beginning to show signs of genuine healing. Preparing the stage, Sarah replied, her voice carrying grim satisfaction. Tomorrow morning, when those guards come for their daily entertainment, they're going to discover that the show has a new director. And I don't think they're going to like the script I've written for them. The plan was elegant in its symmetry. The hegemony used torture as psychological warfare, broadcasting the suffering of their prisoners to intimidate potential rebels throughout the galaxy. Sarah intended to turn that same weapon against them, but with a twist that would expose their crimes to neutral worlds that had previously ignored the hegemony's expansion. She uploaded her modified broadcast protocols to the station's communications system, then began preparing the final element of her strategy. The portable computer contained not just evidence of war crimes, but detailed schematics of every hegemony facility she had been able to access during her time on Nexus Station. Intelligence that resistance movements throughout the galaxy would find extremely valuable. I need you to understand something, Sarah said as she worked. What happens tomorrow morning is going to have consequences that go far beyond this station. The hegemony won't be able to ignore what I'm planning, and they'll probably respond with force. A lot of innocent people might get caught in the crossfire. Zara was quiet for a long moment, considering the implications of Sarah's words. When she spoke, her voice was stronger than it had been in months, touched with the steel that had once made her people fierce opponents of hegemony expansion. My people have been fighting the hegemony for 3 years, she said finally. We've lost entire worlds to their fleets, watched billions of our kin enslaved or worse. If what you're planning can help end that suffering, then the risk is worth it. Sarah nodded grimly, not surprised by the answer, but grateful for the confirmation. She had spent too many years in military service to harbor any illusions about the cost of warfare. Even when fighting for the most righteous of causes, the chronometer on her computer showed 0500 hours. In 2 hours, the morning shift would begin, and the guards would arrive for their daily torture session. Sarah had that long to complete her preparations and get into position for the final phase of her plan. Can you make it back to your cell on your own? She asked Zara. I need you there when the guards arrive. It has to look like everything is normal until the last possible moment. Zara tested her legs again, noting with surprise that the properly treated injuries felt stronger than they had in weeks. Yes, I can manage. But what about you? Where will you be? Sarah's smile was sharp as a blade. I'll be watching from the security booth. The guards like to record their sessions for posterity. This morning, they're going to get a much more personal view of the action than they're used to. They made their way back to the detention levels together, moving through maintenance corridors and service passages that avoided the main security checkpoints. The station was in its quiet cycle now, with most of the alien crew either asleep or focused on routine tasks that didn't require heavy supervision. At the entrance to the detention block, Sarah and Zara separated. Zara returned to her cell, settling herself in the corner where the guards expected to find her. Sarah continued deeper into the facility, heading for the security control room that overlooked the prisoner areas. The guard on duty was a young Kithara who had clearly drawn the unpopular overnight shift. He was half asleep at his station, mandibles clicking occasionally as he dozed. Sarah approached from his blind spot, moving with the silent precision of a trained soldier. The neural disruptor was one of her more exotic pieces of equipment, a small device designed to temporarily overload the artificial nervous systems that most hegemony species use to enhance their natural abilities. The guard never even knew she was there before collapsing unconscious at his post. Sarah dragged the body to a storage closet, then returned to the security station and began familiarizing herself with the controls. The detention level was monitored by dozens of cameras and sensors, all feeding into the central observation system. More importantly, the torture sessions were recorded and stored here before being distributed to the hegemony's entertainment networks. At 0700 hours exactly, the morning shift arrived. Sarah watched on the security monitors as 3 Kithara guards made their way through the detention block, energy batons crackling with anticipation. These were the same 3 who had tortured Zara every morning for months, and Sarah had studied their faces carefully in the archived recordings. The lead guard, designated as Commander Vex in the personnel files, was particularly enthusiastic about his work. Sarah had watched hours of footage showing him breaking Zara's wings with scientific precision, documenting the healing process between sessions, and discussing the psychological effects of prolonged torture with his colleagues. Today, Commander Vex was going to learn what it felt like to be on the other side of that equation. The guards entered Zara's cell with their usual casual confidence, expecting to find their victim huddled in the corner where they had left her the previous day. Instead, they found her standing upright in the center of the cell, her wings partially spread despite their obvious injuries. More surprising still, she was looking directly at them with eyes that no longer held the empty despair they had worked so hard to cultivate. "Good morning," Zara said, her voice steady and clear. "I believe you gentlemen have an appointment with someone who's been looking forward to meeting you." Commander Vex tilted his insectoid head, confused by the prisoner's behavior. What are you talking about, Wingrat? Lie down so we can begin your morning therapy? I don't think so, Zara replied calmly. Not today. The lead guard raised his energy baton, ready to strike, but froze as a new voice echoed through the cell. It came from the speakers built into the walls, a human voice speaking with calm authority. Commander Vex, Sarah's voice filled the space around them. Please step away from the prisoner and place your weapons on the ground. The three guards spun around, searching for the source of the voice. Their training told them to secure the prisoner first and worry about external threats later, but something in the human's tone made them hesitate. Who dares to interfere with official hegemony business? Vex demanded, his vocoder buzzing with outrage. Someone who's been watching your official business for quite some time, Sarah replied. And someone who's decided that your entertainment value would be much higher from the other side of the energy baton. The security doors to the cell suddenly slammed shut with a hydraulic hiss, trapping the three guards inside with Zara. At the same moment, a faint hissing sound began emanating from the ventilation system. What's happening? The second guard, D,